Well, hello, and welcome to the Coaching Business Spotlight Show. I'm your host, Kat Knecht, and I'm excited to share with you soul-driven strategies that help you succeed in your business and your life. And today we are going to be talking more specifically about your life. I'm going to look at what I think of as the spiritual side of coaching. Here's a quote I read recently by William Sloane Coffin Jr. A spiritual person tries less to be godly than to be deeply human. I just loved that because no matter what your spiritual beliefs are, if you have any, my belief or my view is that coaching connects us to that deep human experience in others and in ourselves. That's really where we're going to be looking today at you, the coach, the person. Before I wrote my book, Evolve Your Coaching Business, and launched my business academy for coaches, I wrote a book called The Soul Search. You can find it on Amazon if you get curious about it after the Seven podcast. I'm very proud of this book. This book, I talk a lot about my journey, personal journey through many stages of my life, but I also do talk about how the part about becoming a coach, the more personal side. The Soul Search is a more personal book. And it came though from my many years as a coach and witnessing how my clients grew and became that person they most wanted to be and have that life that they wanted to have. So I started tracking it, and I did this for about 5 years to really pinpoint what was it that helped them to learn and grow and create what they wanted. During the time of writing this book, I attended the seminary and I became ordained as an interfaith minister. I studied religion, spiritual practices, personal growth philosophies. It spanned a whole range of human potential, I'm going to say, from all religions, time periods. You could say that exploring the human condition for clues on how to grow and prosper is my passion. And for a few years, I visited spiritual communities across the United States. I gave sermons and workshops. It was very fulfilling for me. And yet, my calling is with helping coaches, those light workers who are doing the day to day work of helping people wake up to their own best self, best life. Recently, I spoke at a Unity church nearby in Unity of Ventura, and I delivered a sermon on guidance. And I was struck by how important it is for me to stay connected to a higher power. So, on today's show, I'm going to bring you a few excerpts from that talk for those coaches who also want to kind of be reminded or get some guidance on how to make that connection. And because I'm stumbling over my words today, because I have a lot to say, and that's when I usually stumble over my words, is because I have more words than one that want to come out of my mouth. You ever have that? Here's the thing. What I believe is that guidance is always right, even often when you can't see the reason why. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about guidance, how it's worked for me personally, so that it will connect you with your guidance. This can be your personal guidance. Also, I believe so many coaches that I work with or encounter tell me they have a calling for coaching. That's how they describe it to me. They say, so there's something here that's pulled me, that's drawn me in. And I do believe that's guidance. You've been guided to this profession. Perhaps you've been guided to listen to this podcast today. Well, I was guided to this topic on my birthday. I celebrated back on June 12th, and I decided I was going to make this day really special and spoil myself. And I just wanted it to be me. So I didn't have a party. I didn't even answer my phone calls or anything. It was just me. And I wanted to have a special outing, something called an artist date. And this is a kind of experience that I learned about from the author of The Artist's Way, Julia Cameron. You might be familiar with The Artist's Way. This is a date with yourself intended to nourish that soul, that spark of your creativity. And it had been a long time since I had just had a day to play all by myself. I was enjoying my morning coffee. There's this thing I get, it's called the Daily Word, and I opened this little booklet. It it usually gives me a spiritual boost of wisdom, I'm going to say. But on this day, the day was pray for others, which I was like, yeah, this is my day of not caring about other people. This is just about me. So I started thinking about that. Well, if it's not prayer and I'm thinking about myself, what is it that I want to like tune into? And this was I mean, I laughed right out loud and just me sitting there because I was like, oh, it's guidance. I'm being guided to think about guidance. It really struck me. And I knew in that moment I was going to write this sermon that I that I did a few weeks ago. And I didn't know I was going to make a podcast out of it. But I got such a hit. Does that ever happen to you where you get an idea? You might read it, it might just, and you go like, oh, that's, there's something there for me. And you know it's right because guidance is right. So I jotted down some notes for this talk I was going to give. I kind of wrote an outline right there. And I was reminded how this has been a practice of mine since I was a child. When I was 7, so I went to church all the time, every Sunday as a kid, because my dad was a musical director. So he directed the choir and he did all the musical things that happened in a church service. That's what he did. But we had a Sunday, I believe my great grandmother who was living with us at the time was not well, and we stayed home from church. And I had this thought as a kid, God must be missing me because I usually went to church and I just was, as a kid, I had this experience of connecting with something beyond myself. So I went into the field and I had this wondering because I noticed that there was a lot of tension and fighting going on in my family and other places like there was people were unhappy about how things were and complaining and it just bothered me. So I asked for guidance. Like, what's this all about? I don't understand why people are complaining and seem unhappy when I think we have, so much to be grateful for. And I heard a voice, literally, Kat, what you're meant to do in this world is to help people understand how to get what they want and how to love each other. It sounds, I don't know, maybe hokey talking about it here. It was true. It really happened. I went on a mission from there. So my guidance then and since then it often comes in the form of a voice. But I know it might come differently for you. There are a lot of different ways that we hear guidance, that we open to guidance. I know for some people it's like there's a coincidence. You see, oh, here, you notice a thing comes into your awareness because you've been thinking about it or seeking an answer around it. Some people ask for signs. One thing I realized when I was thinking about this 7-year-old experience was, and we do talk about this in coaching a lot, how it's about that childlike, right? Curiosity. We're open to things that don't necessarily make logical sense. I believe that as if you think back to your childhood, you might remember, you might get in connection with, there were ways you were guided. There was something you might, so there's also intuition, which I think of as our inner wisdom, and they connect with each other. They're not two totally separate things. But you might remember a time when you were like, oh, right, there was a time when I trusted in kind of being guided. I had a changing experience. This is something that is in my book, The Soul Search. And it was an experience. I was kidnapped and I was held at gunpoint for many hours when I was 17. Many hours, meaning many hours. And I tuned in. I actually asked for help. I asked for guidance. And even though I was terrified, I heard this voice. For me, it comes through really loud and clear. It guided me step by step to do the things that eventually saved my life and that of my friend who was with me at the time. Here's something when I was reviewing this story for this talk, I got, oh, well, part of why I was able to do that was I had cultivated that relationship with spirit. That's part of, I believe, whatever your spiritual practices are or not, personal growth, perhaps, it's so important to nurture them and so that and establish that connection to guidance so that you can continually tune in. This was what I'm going to say was an impossible situation. Really, it was linearly, logically. There was nothing in this situation that would say these girls are going to get out of this thing alive. But since I already had that channel open, I was able to tune in. And what I took from that, what I want you to take from that is you don't need it. That's extreme, right? You don't need to wait for an extreme situation. Hopefully, you will never have one of those. But I'm going to encourage you to create some kind of a ritual where you open and ask for guidance because guidance is never wrong. Sometimes you don't listen. I know I don't. Sometimes there's a misinterpretation of the information, and sometimes it's really not what we want to hear. And here's the thing, guidance doesn't give you the ending. It doesn't say, I'm going to guide you to this beautiful, it's all it just gives you the steps and the end and it tells you guidance, true guidance, I believe, is always positive in its tone. And it's like, here's the thing that's going to be helpful to you. Here's the place where you're going to learn your lesson. Here's the next thing to do, to bring that into creation. Author and teacher, philosopher Park Palmer says, there is as much guidance on what does not and cannot happen as there is in what can and does. This could be a whole other podcast, and it might be the difference between listening to guidance say to you, no, I don't think that's the right way to go, and your saboteur telling you you're wrong, you're bad, you're stupid, it's never going to work out. Two very different voices. My little cliff note for you on that today would be to go guidance always feels good even if you don't like what it says. The saboteur always feels bad, even if you like what it says. It just doesn't feel good. Your energy goes down. It kind of things go dead. Guidance sparks something. So I had an experience. I think of it as one of the lowest times of my adult life. And this was Curtis and I, my husband Curtis and I had endured a family crisis, I'm going to say. And because of that, we were facing a financial crisis. Our beautiful home where we had settled and had set up, not just a place to live, but this is where we had our business offices and we had this beautiful cottage that was for our family and we also used it as a rental cottage and it was fun way to make money and meet people from all over the world. Well, this was back in 2008. And if you live in the United States, although I think this impacted much of the world, we were suffering a real estate dive. Like the economy had taken a dive and our house was underwater, meaning we owed more on it than it was worth. So I asked, there were some other things happening too. So I asked guidance, like, what to do? Here's the situation. And I didn't like the answer at all because I wanted to hear, just keep the faith, Kat. It's all going to work out. A miracle's going to happen. Just wait and see. But the guidance said, it's time to let this go. It's time to, in this case, short sell the house and let all the money that we had invested go. Ooh, I'll tell you the truth. It took me a long time to follow that guidance. Guidance is always there. It's always right. You have to ask or be open. I think sometimes it's just a question in your mind and then listen to what it says and feel into that. We do this a lot in coaching. We ask our clients, what does that feel like? What are you noticing when you say that? What's happening right there? And this is true when you personally are opening to guidance. So that guidance led me to one of the greatest personal growth spurts of my life. I was called forth to use my talents to grow in my faith. It became at that time the most successful I'd ever been in my coaching business because I really got something from having gone through the experience of listening to guidance and following it. And it worked out, not how I wanted, but in the end, better in a very different way. So guidance can also be confusing, right? So as I said, I went to seminary. I was an ordained interfaith minister. I loved doing talks and talking about the personal growth quest and how the spiritual aspect of that. And with everything I did, I got thumbs up, do it. Guidance was like, go to seminary, learn how to write sermons. At the time that I was right before this, or at the time I was writing the soul search and going to seminary, I used to be afraid of public speaking. I was scared. I could never imagined myself doing this. So part of the guidance can lead you to get past some of your fears. Because I learned to get over my fear of public speaking, was soon replaced with a love, which was then replaced with a passion for speaking to big audiences, little audiences. I love it. So the confusing piece came when the guidance was not to pursue a career in ministry like that. So I was like, there was an opening for me. I could have really gone forward in on that path, but I was guided to do something really, really different. I tell this story a lot. Actually, on my vision board that year, I had a church. And I had this thought that perhaps that Curtis and I would start our own church. It would be a very different kind of spiritual gathering place. But I was guided to create a business academy for coaches. Go figure. But it has been something that has used my spiritual wisdom along with all the practical things that I learned building my coaching business way beyond my imagination. It's it's so that's another way guidance works. You get that gut feeling, something is nudging you to pay attention. Do you ever have that? It can be subtle, but if you pay attention and ask for guidance, you're going to be given what I think of as a breadcrumb. So imagine that. There's a little breadcrumbs that guidance give us to follow on the path that's right for us, the path of our heart, the one that's going to bring us joy. It's not the path that's going to alleviate, obliterate, some word, the struggles and the challenges. No way. No, no, guidance doesn't work like that. Life doesn't work like that. You can't bypass that. We call that like a spiritual bypass. If you're wanting to get through life without facing those challenges, but it actually, as I've told in a couple of these stories, it can move you past those previous barriers. So if you're working on something right now, there's something you want. This, like, again, for this show, it's like anything at all. This is something you could start working with, like listening for guidance, asking. It works differently for everyone. I said this earlier. I know there are some people who ask for a sign, like literally, sometimes a sign will be come your way. You ask, pay attention to what shows up in your world once you ask those little clues and breadcrumbs and get curious. Again, this is where I think as coaches, use your coaching skills, listen, get curious, explore underneath what might be logical. Okay, here's I'm going to tell a little more of the story. So, way back at the beginning of this podcast, I told you about this artist date I was going on, right? So, I went on it. I got this thing about guidance and I wrote down this structure for my talk. And I went to this charming little bookstore in Ojai where I live. It's called Bart's Books. It's beautiful. It's an outside bookstore. It has a, what would we call it? It's not like a solid roof. So the sun's coming in. It's just beautiful. And it's filled with used books, hundreds, probably thousands. But guidance led me directly to the new book section. So they have this small little section that is indoors that has new books. And I wandered around. It was just delightful. I was just looking at all the new books and wondering, it's my birthday, right? So I get to buy myself a present. And my eye caught a book title, Living the Artist Way by Julia Cameron. How funny, I thought. And it was a pretty new book. I'd never even heard it. I'd never heard about it. I was on an artist date because of Julia Cameron. And here was a new book of hers staring at me off the shelf. This is one of the most delightful ways I have found that guidance can work when it presents things that just seem to be too coincidental to be true. When I think you just can't make this stuff up. Do you know what I mean? This is true. This is where you can feel the magic and wonder of this universe, just the way children do. They feel that all the time. They expect it. They expect magical things to be happening to them, right? And so often it does. So sometimes guidance comes that way. It's important to pay attention. I also think guidance, at least mine, can come with a sense of humor. Those serendipitous meetings of people, right? Where you're just guided to, this happened to me just the other day. I had met a woman at this wine tasting event and we clicked, kind of had a little connection. And like a week later, I'm on one of my walks and this is how guidance can be so weird. It just was like, oh, instead of turning right, like you usually do, turn left here. Just kind of, and I was like, okay. I mean, I'm just walking. It's pretty, high. And sure enough, like almost literally run into this woman. We like, there she was. We got to have another conversation, make a little deeper connection. Right? Does that happen to you? Do you believe in those things? Well, here's what I'm encouraging you in this podcast is to intentionally invite those experiences into your life. Because when guidance is at work, I feel guided. My mind is no longer leading the way. It's not so our minds so often our minds are great, but they are so often guiding us in areas that the mind just knows how to figure things out, right? The mind knows how to add 2 + 2 and, get us very practically through our life. But when I'm guided, my mind is no longer leading. I feel led by spirit. My heart is in charge. And at times like this one in the bookstore, I feel all tingly. Have you ever had that happen? Where you just feel tingly and you're like, ooh, something is happening here beyond my usual way of navigating the world. So I took the book off the shelf. I opened to the very first sentence written in this book, and here's what the very first sentence said. I'll start at the beginning. This is a book about guidance. So Spirit just wanted to make sure that I was delivered that message, don't you think? Here's a little bit more of what Julia Cameron writes in this book. What is it? Can anyone receive it? Guidance is direction that comes from a higher source of wisdom than we ordinarily encounter. It is a response of the universe to a question. Guidance is available to all of us. It is not the specialty of the elite few. I use guidance to handle doubts in my life. Ultimately, I experience faith. Guidance makes for a happier, lighter life. It's reassuring. It grounds us and can quell our doubts, anxieties, and fears. It leads to our inner wisdom. Romance, finance, tangled business affairs are all fair game for guidance. Wisdom that is usually sought from human sources is readily available from spiritual sources instead. Guidance is always right. This is what Julia Cameron says. And as I said, I think I've said this. Anyway, I want to make sure I say the name of the book. It's called Living the Artist Way. I highly recommend it. I have not all the way through it, but it's really, really fun. And in this book, Julia makes a case and gives instruction on how to ask and receive guidance through writing. So if you are a person who journals or you would like to journal, maybe you haven't done it yet. I do. I do morning pages, which is an artist way structure of writing every single day. And I have done this for about 25 years. So if you're a person who thinks journaling is helpful or you do journaling, I really encourage you. I've been doing this with my morning writing, and I found it a really inspiring tool that connects me to what's possible beyond my logical thinking. And in just a few weeks that I've been doing it, I can't go into all the details, but things have changed in my life. I've been getting guidance on a whole way I've wanted to upgrade my business. I got guidance just to take the steps, and I've gone past some fears that I've held on to for a long time. This is one of my big new ahas about following guidance is it helps you move past your fears because information shows up that you go, "Oh, I'll just do that. That feels good. That feels right," or whatever the guidance is saying, and then you do it, and there's something that you can continue along this path. So I have one more story before I go. So on my birthday, as I said, I got this download. I think of it as a download whenever I'm writing a talk or a sermon or writing a blog or getting ready for a podcast, whatever it is. So I wrote down the string of ideas that came with that guidance in this notebook. And so when I sat down to write this talk, I couldn't find the notebook anywhere. I mean, I tore up the house looking for it. I got frantic at one point, like, oh my gosh, I wrote down all the ideas of how to get this talk going and how to structure it. But I let it go. I couldn't find it. I just sat down, I wrote what came through, and I hit a moment in my writing where I got this urge to go downtown and get a cup of iced coffee. Iced coffee is one of my treats. I argued with the urge. Sometimes, sometimes when guidance comes through me uninvited, this is what I felt like. Guidance was uninvited. No, I don't want to go spend money on cold coffee or whatever. I'm busy. But the urge wouldn't go away. So I just gave up. I let go. I grabbed my new book. I was like, oh, let's go read some of that new book on guidance. I put it in my backpack. I found this beautiful table in the shade at this little coffee shop. And I pulled out my book to read because I wanted to read it while I was drinking my coffee. And as I pulled out the book, there was the notebook with all the notes for the talk. Luckily I had followed many of them, but it was again, I feel like this spirit has this sense of humor, or whatever you might think about it. The universe has a sense of humor. It was like saying, Kat, chill a little bit, okay, around this stuff. You're being guided. You can trust it. So guidance can also come uninvited and unexplained. So I'm going to leave you. This is really, I'd love to hear from you. If you take me on, I'm going to challenge everyone listening to this podcast to maybe just for this coming week to play with your guidance, play around with it, see how it works for you. Maybe you ask and you look for a coincidence or a sign. Maybe you take on the writing assignment like I did, and you just write down, here's what I'd like guidance on. Maybe an answer comes to you in written form, or it might come through a voice like mine does, or some urge or some image. Just a it's a little plug for my book. Although, if you're interested in finding out more about how I have used guidance, you can get the Soul Search on Amazon. I also have a new training course. I've really decided in my business academy, it's important to have a whole course on connecting with yourself, with your heart, with your values, with that spiritual side of you. So I've created a training course for coaches, Soul Search training course. And if you're interested in finding out about it, just reach out to me. I'd love to hear how this works for you. So no matter how you go about it, please send me a note. Kat at Soul Driven Success. I love getting messages from my listeners. It keeps me inspired, and it often gives me an idea to pass on to my listeners in the next show or the people when I write my blog. So have fun with that. Until next time, thanks so much for listening.